I'm Paige Browning. Libby's out for the week, but before she left, she recorded a long interview with book author Jeff Chang, who has a new book about Bruce Lee. It's a really interesting dive into Lee's life, including his time here in Seattle. We're airing their conversation for our show today.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. Bruce Lee holds a special place in Seattle's heart, and Seattle played a key role in Bruce Lee's personal life and development as a martial arts teacher. He attended the University of Washington and taught martial arts around the city. He met his wife, Linda, and started a family here. And after his tragic young death at the age of 32, Lee was buried at Lakeview Cemetery on Capitol Hill. In some ways, the Seattle years for Bruce Lee were a more private interlude between his child stardom in Hong Kong and his rise as a gung fu movie action star. A new biography by historian and author Jeff Chang traces this journey alongside the cultural and political context in which the man Bruce Lee was becoming the international icon he is today. It's called Water, Mirror, Echo, Bruce Lee and the Making of Asian America. And in the book, Chang shows how the rise of Bruce Lee mirrored the rise of Asian American identity, how one shaped the other and vice versa. Jeff Chang is the author of Water, Mirror, Echo. Thank you so much for being here. I am enjoying the book a ton. I have just been voraciously getting through pages, and I'm already thinking about my gift list for the holidays because it's really been such a pleasure to get to live with this book. So thank you, Jeff, for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia. It's such a pleasure.
So listeners might know you from your seminal history of hip hop, Can't Stop, Won't Stop. And I'm just curious, before we get launched into the Bruce Lee story, how did you get from writing about music history to Bruce Lee? Why did you want to tackle this icon of Asian America?
There's actually a very little connection. After I wrote Can't Stop, Won't Stop, a Korean American editor in the industry named Junie Don came to me and he said, "Hey man, you're an Asian American that wrote this history of hip hop. I bet you could do a biography of Bruce Lee." And I was like, "Yeah, hell yeah, I could do that." So it took me a really short time to be able to sign up. It took me forever to write the book after that. And so unfortunately I didn't finish the book with Junie, but I had an incredible editor, Rakia Clark, who I just owe everything to her. She helped me put it together and bring it home.
And was this a personal passion of yours ahead of the recommendation to write the book? Did you grow up a Bruce Lee fan?
Yeah, I think our entire generation did,
Who didn't, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's we're all kids out there. I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii. And so everybody on the playground was Bruce Lee, right? And the way I liken it actually is that I am just the way my kids never knew a time before hip hop. It's hard for me to remember a time before Bruce Lee, And so we never got to see him on the screen. We saw him on TV. And then later on when, those things called video cassette recorders came in, we were watching those and wearing those out and breaking the tapes on those from overuse. But yeah, so we all grew up with Bruce Lee. And I think that when, we came up with hip hop, Bruce Lee became the guy that put us in the conversation. I remember, I think it was Giant Robot that actually put out this doctored, photoshopped image of Bruce Lee shirtless with wearing some dark glasses, with his hands up over a pair of turntables.
With a turntable, yeah.
Getting ready to get busy, right? That was our generation's kind of Bruce Lee. He was the guy that made us cool.
Yeah.
So I definitely grew up with Bruce Lee and getting a chance to be able to write about him, man, I learned so much,
So just to get some grounding in the biography here, Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco when his parents were working here. His father was a famous Cantonese opera singer and later a movie star. Bruce himself was a famous child actor in Hong Kong when they returned. And there is this interesting mix of things that you write about in his childhood. He is a relatively rich kid. His parents have drivers and servants and things.
Yeah.
And yet there is this rough and tumble aspect. He is starting street fights. He's kicked out of school at one point. This is Hong Kong under British rule. What is the scene like that he's growing up in, and how did that shape young Bruce Lee?
Well, I think, Bruce was a small child. He So yes, he's born in San Francisco in a segregated hospital in Chinatown, right? This is something that I think has been almost not buried, but it just hasn't been talked about. He was born in the U.S. during the time when the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in full effect. And he's born in a segregated hospital in Chinatown. And his parents are here on a work visa to perform in the Cantonese opera. But, you know, if you had looked at Trump's executive order that's trying to get rid of birthright citizenship, right? Bruce would have been deported with his parents immediately, you know, under Trump's order, which is now sitting in the courts, and the Supreme Court will probably weigh in on it. But
and he would never have been able to come back as a citizen.
He never would not have, yeah, he would not have been, he was born a citizen. Trump's trying to get rid of that type of right. And so, you know, people are like, why do you hijack the current immigration debate into this? It's because it's something very real for a lot of us, you know, as folks who are of Asian or Pacific Islander descent in the U.S. And also it's part of the politics of immigration. Like the things that are going on now are not so different from what they were back then. Anyway, just to kind of fast forward on this. So Bruce grows up in Hong Kong after the war, which he barely survives, right? He's like many kids on the verge of starvation, but his parents are able to nurse him through this. And then he is growing up in a Hong Kong in which the Chinese Civil War has ended and refugees are pouring over the border. So literally hundreds of thousands of people are populating Hong Kong overnight. And most of those folks are young. And the young men are underhoused, underfed, and angry. And they're also bringing with them a lot of different types of fight club things. They've been studying Kung Fu in the cities that they're coming or the towns that they're coming from. And so there's this really elaborate kind of fight culture that grows up. And Bruce falls into this, right? He's a small kid, so he's bullied. And I think that that's when he decides, man, I got to learn how to defend myself. But he actually finds that he loves the taste of blood. And so he gets into these fight clubs and he's over there going, hey, man, my school, Wing Chun, is better than your school, Charlie Foot. So let's like fight on the rooftops. All of these kids end up in the movie industry 10 years later, which is why we get all of these Kung Fu movies where it's like, oh, my school is better than your school. And, you know, they're now just wearing Ming Dynasty costumes and it's transported back into history. And on a movie set. So Bruce is ahead of the game because his father is a superstar in the Chinese film. And so he's a teen idol. He's like somebody who's very handsome and he's got this double life. He's a cha-cha dancer. He's on the screen in like cashmere sweaters and he's like looking, you know, very cool and young ladies like idolize him. He's giving out glamour pictures of himself. And then he's also getting into these fights in the streets.
And you write particularly about one or two incidents of Bruce getting the best of white British bullies. And like one scene where there's a white British bully who he wins a fight and then he kind of stuffs the kid in a bathroom stall and, you know, steals his clothes and kind of humiliates him, you know?
Humiliates him, yeah.
And there is this, there is this like really, you know, big struggle, especially with the young men in these scenes where there are these, you know, British guys and there's a masculinity struggle happening. Can you talk to me a little bit about like the role of colonialism on Bruce's perspective at that time?
Sure. You know, Bruce is, as you were saying, as we were talking about, relatively privileged as far as, you know, Chinese kids go. But he's always also aware that the British colonial administration is going to block his, you know, sort of his avenues towards what he might want to become or be. And so he's very resentful. There's sort of a nationalism that grows up in him. You know, and he is at least a quarter European as well. And you know, and yet he identifies with the other kids who are like that. So, you know, after school, he's going with his friends up to the British private school. He's a private school kid, right? But he's going up to the British private school and he's trying to pick fights. And that's sort of one of the things that he carries with him, is this sort of resentment that's fostered from a very young age, and it's born of like multiple humiliations, big and small.
So again, he is this successful young actor, teen idol, cha-cha dancer. He has a number of big movies under his belt. Like The Orphan is, considered a classic at this point, and his acting particularly maybe one of his best roles. But he is struggling in school. He's a distracted student. And at a certain point, his parents get exasperated. Yeah. Why do they decide the answer is we send our son alone back to the United States?
Well, I think that part of it was that they knew, look, when they left the country, when they left the U.S., and Bruce is like just a couple of weeks old or several weeks old, they had to fill out this elaborate paperwork to assert Bruce's citizenship. And literally at the bottom of it, and so they go through these humiliating interviews, they're called the alleged father and the alleged mother of Bruce Lee. But every Chinese person born in the U.S. had to go through this if they were going to leave the country. It's very difficult for people to understand these days, like just how little freedom they had, even trying to leave, even trying to leave. And so it was imprinted, I think, on their parents' minds that Bruce would have to come back at some point to be able to assert his citizenship. And they knew that the selective service thing was going to be coming up. And at the same time, Bruce is getting into all these fights. And finally, he gets into one too many fights. His parents get called into the school. The policemen are there. They're like, look, we're going to arrest your kid, throw him under the jail. He's causing so much problems. And his brother is really worried for him. His brother's going to his parents and saying, Bruce is going to get himself killed. He's like fighting the wrong people now. And he's winning actually a lot of the time. And so they're pissed off at him. And his parents are alarmed.
There's like triad, things kind of lurking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, organized crime.
There's different types of things that are lurking. He's fighting the folks of connected kids, or the kids who have connected folks, I should say. And so they're like, that's enough. We're putting you on a long, slow boat to America, a 3-week journey. We're giving you $100. You're going to have to figure it out. And it's really interesting, the change that comes over him. His brother, Robert, describes, the change as being of like going from night to day. He's suddenly like very, like piously studying. He realizes he's going to come to this country. He's been flunking all his English classes. How is he going to live? He doesn't know anybody. The only people he's going to know are his parents' friends who are a generation older than him. And he's a little scared, I think. That's what we kind of see in his writings, in his Chinese writings from this time.
Mm. And you had access to these journals that you were kind of getting a little inside look at what he's thinking at the time. And in some cases, I mean, it's very emotional. In some cases, he talks about crying at night because he's so lonely. He's only 18 when they send him on the boat.
When they send him on the boat, and you mentioned The Orphan, right? So just to contrast this, right? He's in the biggest movie of his lifetime, The Orphan, which is set to be sort of this rebel without a cause, but adapted for China. For Hong Kong specifically, I'm sorry, for Hong Kong.
People were calling him like James Dean, basically.
Right, exactly, the James Dean of Hong Kong, from this amazing performance in which he's literally acting out these weird kinds of things, right? This sort of desire to be like accepted, and as well like this like utter outsiderness, this sort of outcast at the fringe of society, like juvenile delinquent type of thing. He's acting out his life tensions on the screen. And when the movie comes out, it's like, wow, this is a new star. And all the directors are like, where is this kid? We need to cast him. He's long gone. He's like out of pocket. He's in Seattle by this point because, and he's completely cut off. So the drama of him coming back to the U.S. at this particular moment at his life is just completely heightened. Mm. But it's really in San Francisco that he begins to understand what it means to be restricted. He's living in a segregated city in Chinatown, right? He goes 2 blocks up the hill, he can't be there. He goes 2 blocks down the hill, he can't be there. Those are white neighborhoods. And his parents are finally like, he gets into fights there in Chinatown. So his parents are like, no, we got to send you to Seattle. And I think this is where he really becomes the hero that we know today, because this privileged kid learns what it means to be a real social outcast by living in the Central District in a city that's 95% white. And the Central District is where all of the folks of color and poor whites are relegated to. And so being in this kind of situation, that's what I think makes him now the global icon of the underdog.
Okay, we're going to pause here for just a minute. You're listening to Soundside, and we're talking with Jeff Chang, the author of Water, Mirror, Echo. It's a biography that takes a deep dive into Bruce Lee's life. When we come back, Libby and Jeff will discuss Lee's time in Seattle and how it shaped him into the icon we know today. I'm Paige Browning. We'll be back in just a minute. Back with more Soundside, I'm Paige Browning. We're devoting the show today to a conversation Libby recorded with Jeff Chang, whose new book, Water, Mirror, Echo, takes a close look at Bruce Lee's life beyond the legacy that we know today. So far, Libby and Jeff have discussed Lee's early life in Hong Kong. Next, they're going to dig into the transition to his new life here in Seattle. One person was an especially formative force during that time. Here's Libby.
Ruby Chow looms large at first in his Seattle story. Many listeners will know her as like an iconic civic and business figure in Seattle's history, especially for the Chinese American community here. She was the first Asian American elected to be on the King County Council. She had an incredibly successful restaurant. The girls' drill team that she began, she had the idea for, is still an ongoing cultural legacy. Were you familiar with Ruby Chow before you started working on this book? What was your research process like in, again, this Central District, CID, Beacon Hill, University District elements of Bruce's life, and specifically Ruby Chow? What was your process like?
I actually didn't know anything about it. If you read most of the Bruce Lee biographies, you'll just hear his friends referring to Ruby Chow as the woman who Bruce worked for, whom he hated. And
the relationship was not cozy. Yeah.
No, it wasn't cozy. And they described her as a dragon lady. And I thought, there's something going on here that doesn't feel right, but I need to find out more about it. And what I found out, of course, is that Ruby Chow was really the most powerful Asian American person in the country at that particular moment, right? In the beginning of the 1960s. I don't think that there's a single person who can command a city's elite, their attention, like Ruby Chow can. And she's done this from the vantage point of having her restaurant, at the top of First Hill, and also being somebody who is not afraid to actually get in there and mix it up and become a broker. So she's doing everything. She's helping people with their immigration cases. She's helping people with their health, issues, trying to get them services from Seattle's healthcare system, right? Because again, it's still in many ways segregated. She's somebody who is, working on criminal stuff like that come up. Like she's helping both the police and she's helping folks who live in the CID. She's got her hands in just about everything that's happening in the city, and Bruce goes to work for her and is living, in the sort of housing, the little sort of rooms, bunks and that kind of thing above the restaurant, and so the encounter is a lot deeper than just Bruce didn't like her and Ruby's a dragon lady. This is a young kid coming into working for the most powerful Asian American in the country and like learning actually what it means, what the structure really of Chinatown, of Asian America is like at this particular point. And what's really interesting is that suddenly Bruce develops kind of this almost kind of pseudo-Marxist type of critique of Ruby. He's like, man, look at all of us workers. We're like here at the bottom, and we're making Ruby rich so she can move to, whatever, to Seward Park or whatever. Like she's like explaining all of us. And there's
it's like a Maggie's Farm moment.
it's exactly. That's a really good way to describe it. And like whatever, some of it's in his imagination, maybe some of it's true. What is true is that I think Ruby also teaches him a way to be able to make it in America. I think he's absorbing a lot of lessons from her. Perry Lee, one of the great sort of historians of Bruce Lee, Seattleite, showed me Bruce's first business cards, and they're an exact copy of Ruby's like graphic design and her like menus and her, it's red and gold, and it's like he was putting out business cards at the age of like 20 so that he could advertise like his whatever his kung fu services. So he's actually learning a lot of things professionally about how to make it, but he's also beginning to understand like how Chinese Americans in the new generation can interact with white elites and white American society. And I think that this prepares him for when he finally is able to graduate from Edison Tech and enter into UW.
Yeah, and that's where he got his high school diploma, basically, and took a lot of English classes, Edison Tech on Capitol Hill. Mm-hmm. And then he's at the University of Washington. He's studying philosophy. He's reading a lot. And then he's developing this following and also these set of studios where he's teaching martial arts. What was that scene like? Were you able to talk to some of his former students if they're still around? And what did that look like in the early 60s?
I was really lucky to be able to be handed through a lot of different folks who were his friends and his students in Seattle. And, they painted a really intimate picture of him, and this is Bruce in formation, so to speak. I think the 5 years that Bruce lived in Seattle were absolutely formative. They made him who he was. And so he is literally like this 18-year-old, 19-year-old trying to figure out like, where am I at? What am I doing? Going immediately into becoming a teacher of students who are much older than him, and in the process, developing these friendships and these relationships that really deeply impact him. And so, he comes to Seattle. Ruby notices that he loves Kung Fu because when he's walking with Ruby and her husband Ping, like he's behind them and he's kicking trash cans and he's like, getting into defensive crouches against like people who are standing on the street on him. Like he wants to like test or fight them. And he's just very unusual and like, yeah, he's just very weird.
The guy has a lot of energy. Ever since he was a kid, that is a theme, that he has more energy than he knows what to do with and that people around him know what to do with.
Ruby notices this and she's like, okay, like how can I actually like direct this guy? So she's like, oh, you can maybe set up a school and you can teach my kids and, and my nephews and nieces and some of their friends and stuff. And so she allows him to be able to do that. But what really happens is he does these public performances, and when he does them, suddenly people are like, what is that? And this is a generation of young folks who are learning about self-defense. There's an interest in karate. There's an interest in judo, the Japanese arts that have come back because of the end of World War II and the fact that a lot of military folks have studied there. And then there's a fascination with the Seattle Dojo, which is right up there on the hill above CID and in the sort of Nihonmachi district. And so he's doing this, but nobody's seen Kung Fu at this particular point in the U.S. And so Jesse Glover and his friend Ed Hart, Jesse Glover, a Black American, Ed Hart, a white American, go to Chinatown to see Bruce doing this demonstration. And and they're totally enthralled. And Jesse is somebody who at the age of 12 was walking back with his friend from Georgetown through the Pioneer Square and didn't run up on, two drunken cops run up on him and his friends, and they beat him horribly. They brutalize him for no reason at all. And so for Jesse, self-defense is really real. He's wanted to learn his entire life. And so he starts stalking. He finds out Bruce is going to Edison Tech like him, and he starts stalking Bruce, like following him, begs Bruce to teach him. And Jesse becomes his first student. And I think in hearing these stories, right, how can you not be moved, right? Like, how could Bruce not be moved by Jesse's story? Another student that Jesse brings in is Taki Kimura, who is 18 years older than Bruce, and who himself, when he's at the age of 18, is on a train heading to concentration camp because he's Japanese American. And that shapes him. And so, Bruce and Taki becomes best friends, and Taki kind of receives from Bruce like all this encouragement and all this confidence and sort of a way of being back in the world that kind of helps him to deal with the fallout and this sort of self immolation, really, that's come out of the camp experience. He gives him his confidence back. And I think that Bruce being in with these guys, that, and then also understanding the Chinatown experience, he begins to see life from the other side, and he begins to identify with those who are put upon or oppressed. And that's what really translates into his movies later on.
I was really struck by one story, and I can't remember if this was Taki or one of the other students who shared it, where Bruce kind of brought that sense of nationalism, because he grew up in Hong Kong, where he's not a minority by any stretch, but had that struggle with the colonial forces of the British and feeling like a sense of like, we have to fight back and like consolidate a strong sense of nationalism as Chinese and Hong Kongers. And so he's in Seattle and he's proclaiming things like, I think Chinese are the best, something like that. And he's bringing that attitude to a place where he's talking with like a lot of these students who have been minorities their whole lives in America and have, a deep sense of, yes, being brutalized, being locked up, having their, everything taken from them because they're minorities. And it really strikes me about how Bruce learns through their experience, maybe what it is to be Asian American. And yet he holds on to that strong sense of identity and pride in who he is in a way that he's been conditioned to from growing up, where he grew up.
Yes, he grows up under an apartheid state, right? Hong Kong, like many of these colonies, are apartheid states, and so like we were talking about earlier, he grows up with a sense of nationalism, and when he comes to the U.S., there's a little bit of naivete, is the way I think that Taki and other folks of color see Bruce, right? Like there's a story that Andy, Taki's son, told me about the two of them. I think they were leaving Taki's grocery one day, and Bruce is driving, and they're driving very slowly. And so a cop comes up behind him, decides to tail him and pull him over, right? Because of course, right? Like driving while Asian, I suppose, right? And so there, Taki and Bruce are laughing about a joke, and the white cop walks up to the window and he's like, "Oh, you think it's funny, huh? You guys just think this is so funny." And Bruce like balls up his fist and is ready to punch the cop like through the window. And Taki grabs his hand and holds it down. So no, we're not going to do that. Right. And has to tell him afterwards, right? Like tries to calm Bruce down, tries to tell him, no, you don't go around beating cops. Like you will end up dead. Taki is coming back into being what he calls his full self, right? And Bruce here is needing to learn and understand like the ways of Seattle and the rest of the U.S.
From his older student who, had been learning from him, but, Taki has all of this life experience under his belt.
Yeah, 2000%. And so this is, I think, the moment where he begins to realize, oh, okay, like things maybe are not the way that they were in Hong Kong. And of course, when he goes to Hollywood, all of this stuff is reinforced over and over and over again. So he begins to realize, I think, at that particular point in Hollywood that the way that Hollywood is treating him is actually part and parcel of the way that folks of color are treated in the U.S. He's learning from people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who he takes on as his student, and they're having these conversations. And Bruce is like, man, I can't get any parts in Hollywood. They just don't understand like what I can do and what I can be. And Kareem gets that, right? Kareem is also somebody who from a young age has been in the spotlight. And Kareem starts, talking to him about the history of colonialism in China and Hong Kong. And Bruce is stunned to find all of this type of stuff out. Like Bruce is giving Kareem the Book of Five Rings, Miyamoto Musashi, one of these classic martial arts manuals. And Kareem is giving him histories of colonialism so that he's finding out, oh man, in Shanghai, you mean there are parks that Chinese couldn't go into? And of course that turns up later in Fist of Fury. But yeah, so he begins to learn that. And I think that that's why he finally decides that Hong Kong is where he needs to be, because people will see him there as he sees himself, which is as a main character.
We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about Bruce Lee's rise in Hollywood and how that got cut short by his sudden and unexpected death. I'm Paige Browning. Soundside will be back in just a minute. And we're back with more Soundside. I'm Paige Browning. You're listening to Libby's interview with Jeff Chang, who wrote a book that looks at the short life of Bruce Lee. It's called Water, Mirror, Echo. We've heard about how his life in Hong Kong and Seattle shaped him into the legend we know today. Now, we're going to dig into the chapter of his life that launched him into superstardom, his big break in Hollywood.
So Bruce, he starts a family in Seattle. He meets his wife, Linda. He has 2 children. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when he wants to be in movies again, he's thinking Hollywood is the way to be. But as you say, he runs into this racism and these blocks. He's in the Green Hornet, he's Kato, and maybe some people notice him in that, the one season of that show. But it's framed as sidekick. He's the quote unquote Oriental.
He's a cook. He's a driver. He's a manservant. Yeah. I mean, and actually, I'll tell you this, that I don't think he ever expected to be back on screen. I think when, especially when he was in Seattle, he was bent on trying to open up all these Kung Fu schools because, he saw an opportunity. People didn't know what Kung Fu was. And then he gets this call out of the blue as he's developing himself and gaining a reputation as a martial artist and going to Long Beach and doing an exhibition there in which there's a lot of Hollywood execs actually and actors and famous people in the crowd. And they're like, who is this guy? This guy is amazing. And because of that, he gets a call out of the blue. He's not even at home when he gets the call. Linda receives the call. And they're like, hey, come out and do this audition. Try out for the part of Charlie Chan's number 1 son. Because that's the only kinds of parts that Asian males can get, right? At that particular point. Like you are a sidekick to Fu Manchu or you're like the number 1 son of Charlie Chan. And he gets in there and he's like, you know what? I'm not going to play a guy wearing a queue in a little Chinese Manchu suit, right? Like that stuff is really offensive to me. I'm not going to do that. And he's not necessarily understanding the history, right, of of Asian Americans in film at this particular point. He's just like, I'm not playing a Manchu because, again, Chinese nationalists, right? Like, those are the folks that we overthrew, right? The Jing Dynasty, we overthrew those guys. And instead, he ends up playing a sidekick, a driver. He's like the person who has no lines in the first several episodes of, he gets an acting coach and they're like, where are your lines? And he has like, I guess I don't have any. But what happens is classic situation, right? The heroes at this particular point, the white heroes in action movies and action flicks are usually gadget guys. They're James Bond, right? They're Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, holding 2 revolvers that are like 9 feet long, right? They're folks who get by through the power of the gun or the power of their superior technology. And so the Green Hornet is getting his butt kicked in every episode, and Kato has to go save him.
Kato is always bailing him out, always.
He's always bailing him out. And so by the middle of the season, the Kato toys are outselling the Green Hornet toys. And so they're like, oh, we got something going on here. Maybe we actually have to shift this up a little bit. Like, and Bruce has already written the script now. He's like ready to go. Here's a script. Like, try this out. And they're like, no, but we're going to give you your stuff. And he is able to really work Kung Fu into this. And so people are like, wow, Asian fighting? Like Kung Fu? Like, what is that? And then they're also like Asian philosophy, because Bruce is able to like get some of that in there as well. And so he's a martial arts star at this particular point in the martial arts world, and he's helping to build the martial arts market all across the country that is rising because of people like Ed Parker and these national contests that Ed Parker is beginning to sponsor. And he's sort of the man for the moment.
Of course, his biggest breakout, though, as a leading man has to come back in Hong Kong. Like, he eventually realizes that. So he heads back. And he has this meteoric success with Kung Fu movies. I think Fist of Fury is probably the one that international audience might know the best. But they are like these 3 huge, just gigantic smashes. And basically, studios in Los Angeles had to be like, oh, well, like we want a piece of that. And Enter the Dragon starts filming. I'm curious, did Warner Brothers at the time realize what they had when that was filming?
No, they did not. They really did not. So we have to take it back a little bit, because and also to say there's Warner Brothers movies and then there's Warner Brothers TV. And so Warner Brothers movies, there's a guy on that side named Fred Weintraub, and he's like, man, I don't understand these Kung Fu movies. I don't really like them, but these Kung Fu movies are going to be huge. And this Bruce Lee guy, he meets him at a party, that's actually at the head of the studio's house. And he's like, this guy is pretty amazing. Like, we should do something with him. So he tries to create a film for him that's called Kung Fu. And he's unable to make it as a film. And so they decide instead that they're going to pick it up on the TV side and make it into a TV series. And so Fred's like, okay, this is the guy. He's got to do this. And the TV guy, like, sort of asked for an impromptu audition. So Bruce comes in, he slams the door, drops his athletic bag, starts throwing some punches, takes out his nunchucks from the bag, starts flinging those nunchucks around. The guy's like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, slow down. He's like, feel my muscles. Like, Bruce is just doing Bruce. And the next day, Fred calls this guy, Tom Kuhn, and he's like, well, what did you think of the kid? And Tom Kuhn was amazing. I think he might be too authentic. And then he says, and nobody's going to understand him. Nobody can understand his accent. Bruce has like a British inflected, Hong Kong, I call it an Asian American accent. But it's convinced,
very proper sounding.
It's very proper sounding.
Yeah,
and
contrast with American English, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just another sort of way of saying, like, we can't have an Asian male lead, And so, of course, they cast David Carradine in this part for this series. They put him in yellowface. They tape up his eyes. David says, I'm going to crouch on the set so I look smaller. And And then they set the debut of this for the week that Nixon goes to China. And so the show blows up, and Bruce is just like, wow, like that's what they really think of me. He's like, okay, that means that I really have to go hard here. If I'm going to be the main character, I have to go hard here. He gives a bunch of interviews in Hong Kong and in Taiwan and around Southeast Asia where he's like, this is where I'm meant to be. And he's heartbroken actually in this. So the whole time that he's there, he's thinking about how to try to come back. And within 2 years, within a year and a half, really, he's blown up. He's had box office hits. He is able to get a deal where he can make his own movie. And this sets him up for Fred to jump back in the picture and say, hey man, like, do you want to try to make a movie here now? And Bruce is like, oh yeah, let's do it. And the fights that he goes through to get the movie made, are
Enter the Dragon. Yeah.
Yeah. To get Enter the Dragon made are, unbelievably taxing. Some of his friends actually say that that's what really might have killed him, was that Bruce was trying so hard to be able to represent Asians and Asian Americans, Asian philosophy, Asian fighting arts in the best possible light, that that's what broke him. So that's sort of where we get to in 1973.
He doesn't live to see it premiere. He dies. The movie premieres a month later. It's also his death, the subject of a lot of tabloid speculation. You have talked about not wanting to dwell on that and the kind of almost conspiracy theory and like constant, fascination with that part of his story. How did you think about approaching that in the book?
Yeah. I was really struck, by the fact that many narratives, many tellings of Bruce's story begin with his death. And I think about it, right? I think about like Jimi Hendrix. I think about Kurt Cobain. I don't think the dominant narratives out there about Jimmy or Kurt like start with their death. But there's something about Bruce that causes folks to be wanting to hear about his death first, or wanting to tell about his death first, as if that's the most significant fact and that's the reason why we remember him. I think that when people are sitting there in the theaters in 1973, and I don't know, because again, I'm a baby. I'm like, I can't get in there. I'm not going to get into that movie, but they're seeing a person who is so alive on the screen, and yet he's gone, and people can't get that. And there's a huge demand, right, to see more of him, to hear more from him. And I think that there's a sort of melancholia around that maybe actually even grows into parody, right, with the Bruceploitation movies and a whole bunch of other types of weird retellings of his story that then kind of cloud his real life with a bunch of myth, as if anybody really understood what his real life was about at that particular point anyway. It's partly my contention that part of the reason that that Bruce has been able to become such a sort of universal, signifier, symbol to so many people floating above things, is because people know so little about Asian America and Asian Americans. But it's also my contention that if people actually really know about these facts, these details of his life, that his story becomes much more universal. And the mountains that he scaled, the fact that he broke the bamboo ceiling for us is just, it's awe-inspiring to me.
I understand that this is technically not an authorized biography, but Shannon, Bruce's daughter, she really opened up the archives for you, and you have a relationship with her that's been really fruitful over the years while you've been researching. What has that been like? What has that process been like? And what's your relationship like with the Lee family today?
It's wonderful. It's amazing. I don't think, we don't have to agree on everything, but I count myself as accountable, to them. This is their story. And, I think that there's a way in which, I think you and I can relate to this. As journalists, we're often taught that the relationship that we need to have to the subject is one that's distant, that's quote unquote objective, right? And that, like, one of the outcomes of that, the sort of Janet Malcolm journalist and the murderer type of idea, is that we're gonna betray them, right? We're gonna betray them really badly, and so don't get too close, or don't have that kind of relationship. And you know what?
And that's seen as like a mark of like good journalism, like of
good journalism.
Yeah.
If you really betrayed them,
Exactly.
if you really raked them over the coals,
Yeah.
and I get that, I've done that, But so my good friend Baldwin, who did Be Water, the movie for ESPN, he and I were working on this for many, many years together. And the one thing that he told me from the beginning was, look, man, like, we have to remember that for us, all this stuff, Bruce Lee passing away, Brandon Lee passing away, the curse of the dragon, blah, 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 all this stuff, it's spectacle for us. It's entertainment for some people, but it's their lives. It's Shannon's father, I'm getting emotional thinking about this, but because I've also had a lot of premature death in my family as well. And, it's Linda's husband. It's Shannon's brother. It's Linda's son. And so there's an accountability that I think comes in being able to be gifted with the stories, and then also to be able to hold and retell those stories. And so that's how I've kind of approached this. And it's been that way with everybody that I've been able to interview.
And on that note, you're going to be in community in Seattle with Shannon and friends of Bruce's.
Yes,
it's going to be a really unique event. And I think a lot of folks who have listened, I've been riveted by your storytelling and the way that you have brought this to life for us. But I would just love to hear more about the event that's going to be in Seattle. And this is going to be November 13th. And it's going to be put on by Town Hall Seattle and the Wing Luke Museum. Tell us more.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to be so much fun. I kind of see it as the capstone, the climax of this tour, this book tour that will have been lasting 2 months by this particular flight. But Shannon will be there, and also Bruce's close friends, Sue Ann Kay, who introduced Bruce to Linda, actually, and Doug Palmer, one of his very close buddies. They were folks who knew him in his Seattle days, and they'll have great stories. They'll all be there. Doug's got an incredible book as well, Bruce Lee, Sifu Friend and My Big Brother, that we'll have, and Shannon will have her books, Be Water, My Friend, as well as her new novel with Fonda Lee, Breath of the Dragon. But it's going to be an incredible night. I've been looking forward to this ever since we began the tour, and it's just going to be fantastic.
Before we go, I'm just curious if I can put you on the spot. What is your favorite Bruce Lee performance, favorite movie?
Wow, that's actually really hard. I mean, like there's so many moments, really. But I'd have to say, to me, the pinnacle, if you're talking about Bruce in motion and being poetry in motion, is probably his fight at the Coliseum with Chuck Norris. It's just so beautiful. Yeah. It's so beautiful. And then the other one is the fight in the dojo in Fists of Fury, where he's like conducting, the karate folks, like he's like they're a symphony, and he's like moving them around the room. It's just, those two, I could watch those two forever and ever and ever, and never get tired of them.
Way of the Dragon is the Chuck Norris scene, which it lives in my head rent free forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Jeff Chang, author of Water, Mirror, Echo, which is a biography of Bruce Lee, which I just was riveted by and am so excited to recommend to friends and gift to friends. This is really a special, I think, piece of our expanding our understanding of Bruce and who he was and what he means for the world. And I thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure sitting down with you to talk.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Libby, for your time.
That's it for Soundside today. I'm Paige Browning, in for Libby Denkman this week. Today's show was produced by Maliha Sayed, with support from Jason Burrows, Hans Anderson, Gabrielle Healy, and Sarah Leibovitz. Our editor's Jed Kim. We will be off tomorrow for Veterans Day, but Soundside will be back on Wednesday. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.